Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Janine Joy, and today I'm going to be talking about resilient mindsets ease change. What should you do? And I want to jump right in because I have a lot to cover today. Our agenda, first we're going to talk about what the research, the science says causes resilience. We will briefly touch on some of the benefits of resilience and how resilience eases change. And then we're going to spend the most exciting part of the session talking about how to be more resilient now. Quick word about my style. Some of these slides are included so that you can peruse them later. They may look very detailed, and I won't go into all the details about them. They're there as resources for you. And at other times I'll go quickly because I just want to give you the essence of an idea, but I don't want to take a deep dive with that specific idea because I want time for the most important aspects of the presentation. So with that, let's get going. The definition of resilience is basically the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, being tough, and you'll often hear people talk about the ability to bounce back quickly. What does mindset have to do with resilience? Well, to do pretty much everything with it. In the research, Dr. Fredrickson at Chapel Hill has said that optimism, healthy self-esteem, and an internal locus of control are the key components that make an individual resilient. More recent research is adding self-compassion to that mix, and I completely agree that self-compassion is a very important component that will help someone be resilient. If you're not compassionate towards yourself, you're going to struggle to be resilient. George Bonanno at Columbia has a different approach. He sees psychological flexibility, connection with others, and positive core self-evaluations as the cornerstones of resilience. My opinion, they're both right. We'll talk about that in more detail as we go on. And then there's some research that came out of Scandinavia that talked about secure attachment, which would connect to George's connection with others, experiencing positive emotions, which would connect with optimism, and having a purpose in life, which to me connects to the internal locus of control because it gives you the sense that you are in charge of your life, that you have some control over it. So all of these things connect with each other, but we're going to take a deeper dive on the first 6 of them for just a moment, but not real deep, just for the rest. Okay, this is a quote from my book, Harness the Power of Resilience, Be Ready for Life. Resilience is ultimately the result of experiencing less stress from the same situation by skillfully using one's mind or skills that improve the ability to cope well with adversity. So let's explore those concepts from Dr. Fredrickson and George in more detail now. What is optimism? It simply boils down to positive expectations about the future. If you're optimistic, you have positive expectations about the future. It's very simple, very basic, very hard for some individuals to achieve. The exciting part of this presentation, we're going to give you some ways to help you be more optimistic. Healthy self-esteem. Feeling that you're good enough, that you're competent and capable and worthy, believing in yourself. That's healthy self-esteem. And we've got some cultural dynamics that want people to downplay their goodness and be less than. Those do not serve us well at all. We don't want to be perceived, we don't want to perceive ourselves as better than others, but we don't want to perceive ourselves as small or inconsequential. We want to be able to feel the fullness of our potential and move towards it. Positive core self-evaluations. This ties to healthy self-esteem, but core self-evaluations are usually more related to your skills, to your how you feel about your work? Do you feel confident about your work? Do you feel sure? Do you feel prepared? Are you without doubt? If somebody gives you a task, do you go into a state of anxiety, questioning whether you're up to it, or do you proceed with confidence that even if you don't know exactly how to do it, you can find the answers? An internal locus of control. The youngsters in the room may not recognize these individuals in the photo. That's John Wayne, or the Duke, as older folks might reference him. I love this picture because you can see, even though I put a flower over the pistol that he was holding in this Western, that he is in charge of himself, that he has an internal locus of control, whereas the woman is portrayed in the old-fashioned way of needing someone else to protect her. Well, an internal locus of control is the idea, the internalized belief that you're in charge of yourself, that your thoughts, words, and actions determine the outcomes you experience. Maybe not precisely. I mean, you buy a lottery ticket, your thoughts, words, and actions are not going to dictate that you're going to win the lottery, but they still make a difference. If you think you're never going to win, you'll never buy the ticket, and then you absolutely will never win. And that's true whether it's applying for a job or asking somebody out on a date, anything. So it's an attitude of I solve my own problems. Doesn't necessarily mean that you don't get collaborators to help you solve those problems, but that you are ultimately responsible for that, and that you're not waiting for someone else to solve your problems or protect you, like the old-fashioned image of the woman in this image that John Wayne is protecting. Nothing wrong with male chivalry, but women, nobody should be in a position where they say that I can't help myself, I'm going to just wait for someone else to do it. That attitude, even if you're pretty helpless, reaching out for someone to help you is taking charge and being responsible. If you wait for someone else to notice that you need help, that is an external locus of control. You're giving others your power. Psychological flexibility, I absolutely love this concept. It's been added to the top 10 skills needed for 2020 as far as job skills. It's a new addition to the list. I think it should have always been there. It's just now being recognized more by researchers and finally moving into business realms. What is psychological flexibility? Well, I'm going to introduce another phrase you may not know, metacognition. Metacognition is very simply thinking about what you're thinking and why you're thinking what you're thinking, and could you think something different than what you're thinking about what you're thinking about. So basically it's just not believing the first thing you think. It's the ability to hold multiple perspectives and evaluate each one rationally. It increases the ability to adapt to changes, to be able to see something in a new way, to see it from a different perspective, and it helps people balance priorities. Reduces frustration. It's an extremely important skill. Okay, I'm going to do this with a number of research things. You can look up the research if you want afterwards. I've just extracted tiny bits of information. So this article says humans have the potential to better tolerate and effectively use emotions, thoughts, and behavior to extract the best possible outcomes in varying situations. And this wide range of dynamic abilities form the essence of health. I have a white paper on a website that is at the end of the presentation that goes into a great deal of detail about the physical health implications of high stress. And I have another one at the same site that talks about behavioral and another one that talks about the mental health outcomes. Stress, chronic stress and traumatic stress can both really undermine our health and our overall well-being and our relationships. So this talks about psychological flexibility because psychological flexibility allows you to reduce the amount of stress you're feeling without requiring that you change the situation first. And that's a really key thing to understand, because if you know that you can feel better, you can feel less stress, feel more positive emotions without changing the situation, just by using your mind effectively, you are more inclined to do it because it solves the immediate problem. The immediate problem is I don't feel good and I don't like not feeling good. I want to feel better. So it's possible. This is some of the research that talks about the potential of doing that. Um, this is a chart that you can look at later. Now, I want to mention that this may seem like I'm being flippant about some of the serious problems that are in the situation column. I want to tell you that it seems that way because you don't know how to move from the normal emotions you feel in those situations to the positive silver linings. Some of the stuff that we will talk about at the end will show you ways to do that, but unless you actually apply the information and use it repeatedly, you'll never get there. Knowing this stuff intellectually is never going to get you there. You have to actually use it. The nice thing is that when you use this information, it feels good. So it's unlike anything else that you do for self-improvement where they say that no pain, no gain. This is, you're making gains if you feel better. So it's pleasure equals gain. And so these things on this list are all achievable. I have achieved many of them in situations I have personally experienced. So even though they may appear flippant on the surface, they are not. And so this is a chart that you could take out and you could say, okay, what areas of my life feel like crap? And where do I want to go? So it's kind of like, okay, I feel like crap about this thing I made a mistake about. That's the first one. And then how can I feel better? And you're not going to jump from feeling like crap to feeling good right away. But if you don't even know where you need to go in order to feel good mentally, you're just kind of like a fish out of water flopping around on the bank. If you know what direction to go, it's kind of like if you have your GPS in your car, but you don't know where you want to go, you can't program it. Once you have that address, which is the potential silver lining, then you know what direction to move in. And so that's what this chart is for, and I'm not going to go through all the specific details. Okay, connection with others is another one, healthy relationships. And one of the things I want to point out here is that the research is very clear that it is not having people that you can depend on who will actually help you in a time of need that makes the difference to how resilient and healthy you are. It's whether or not you believe they will help you. You could believe they won't when they would, and you get no benefit. You could believe they would help you when in fact they would not help you, and you get the benefit. So it's about what you think, and the research in this area is very clear. Okay, I'm just going to touch one tiny bit on burnout. Co-wrote a book on this with Phil Geisinger, and the reason I do this is because the traditional definition of burnout is up there. Burnout's the result of chronic stress, largely from one's work. What does that tell you? It doesn't tell you diddly squat, because it doesn't tell you how people get there, why they get there, why some get there, why others don't get there, and it doesn't tell you how to get out of there. So I have my own definition, and this is it. And it's when an individual has inadequate stress management and coping skills for the stress they're experiencing. If they have adequate skills, they don't burn out. If they develop skills, they can reverse it. So that's why I have this here, because I love this juxtaposition of these two definitions. What good is knowing the definition if it doesn't tell you how you got there or how not to go there or how to get out of there if you've gone to this place you don't want to be? Okay, is resilience a learnable skill? Absolutely. There is tons of research that supports this point. I would say a mountain. I actually have a slide somewhere that says a mountain of research that says that. It can be developed before or after it is needed. That's an important point. Somebody who's experienced adversity in the past can improve their present and their future by developing more resilience. However, before is better. Why? Because it prevents suffering. Um, if you're not resilient and you experience adversity, and adversity to someone who's not resilient could be changes at work. It could be your health system being purchased by somebody else. It could be changes that Congress makes and the laws that affect your practice. It could be any number of things that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis and year-to-year basis. So that's why before is better, but after is better than never. So what difference does resilient make? Well, I mentioned already, it prevents suffering. It prevents downward spirals, and we'll talk about that just a tiny bit in a little bit later. It prevents relationship turmoil. It improves mental, physical, and behavioral health. Or it prevents those issues, which I mentioned, those white papers. They're at joywalk.org in the science section. Benefits. It improves the quality of life dramatically. It reduces stress, it makes change easier, it improves perspective, it improves mood, and it increases success. So what does resilience do? Well, for one thing, you see the silver lining faster when you're resilient. That's actually part of what makes you resilient. And it also makes change seem easier. If you're confident and sure and you trust yourself and you have that you think you're good enough and you're optimistic, then when a change happens, you're not really all that worried about it. It seems like a molehill to you, while a coworker is seeing this huge mountain, but you're both looking at the same situation. One of them is thinking, oh gosh, with this change, what happens if I lose my job? What happens if my income goes down? What happens if I don't like my new responsibilities? And so on and so forth. Whereas the other one says, well, if I lose my job, I'll find another one. Maybe it'll even be better. If my job responsibilities change and I don't like it, I can do something else. I'm not bound to do what I'm doing forever. I have skills and I have capabilities and I have the ability to network and I could do something different. So their level of stress is like the molehill, whereas the other person's is like a mountain. That's what makes them more resilient. It's not that one is better than the other. It's that one's mind actually creates less stress out of that change than the other one. Perspective. Okay, a lot of people will say, I'm just being realistic. That's why I'm not an optimist. I'm just a realist. Well, perspective creates reality. And if a realist wants to be real, they'll be optimistic, because if you look at the research, optimists have far better outcomes in every single area of life, including the fact that they live on average 10.7 years longer. And a realist will say, well, those last 10 years are often pretty bad. I'll give them up. Nope, doesn't work that way, because the optimist, will they live 10.7 years longer than the pessimist? They only experience about 2 years of poor health prior to death, whereas pessimists, on average, experience 6 to 8 years of chronic health conditions before they die 10.7 years younger. So if you want to be a realist and you want the best life possible, you're going to develop some optimism, because the reason is pessimism is stressful, and stress does all sorts of junk to your mind and your body and your relationships, which your relationships support good health and good mental health and good physical health and good behavioral health. So if you screw up your relationships because you're a pessimist, then it's going to further contribute to the downward spirals you're going to experience in those other areas. It's all tied together. Okay, this is going to be a really fast run through, but basically the old toolkit of support strategies, coping skills, included dysfunctional strategies, maladaptive, palliative, adaptive, and then the new toolkit that I'm talking about today, that I talk about anytime anybody will let me talk about it, are advanced and transformational stress management skills, which are developing healthy habits of thought, and the transformational level is when they become your automatic response, which is when life gets really, really good. The Dysfunctional and maladaptive are unhealthy habits of thought. I've got a slide on that later that gives you a list of some of the unhealthy habits of thought. And then palliative and adaptive, if you do a Google search on stress management, 95% of the results are going to be palliative, which they're not curative or preventative. They simply make you feel better for a little while, the way an aspirin helps a headache, but it doesn't help the headache you might have tomorrow. The new toolkit changes your future, that it's curative. It increases human thriving in those who apply it. So let's go really, really quickly. Dysfunctional stress management strategies. We all know what this looks like. If you need to come back to the slides, you'll be able to, or you could pause the presentation and read it, but we're going to go really fast. Dysfunctional stress management kind of looks like maladaptive is withdrawal, suppressing emotions, smoking, and avoidance. Those types of things, and self-critical thought. Palliative stress management. This is resting your mind. This is meditation. It is beneficial. It's far better than not doing anything, and it's far better than dysfunctional or maladaptive strategies. But do you see that little strip down there at the bottom under the words? If you don't know what that is, that's one of those tire strips that will puncture your tires if you drive over it in the wrong direction. Well, palliative, this is the explanation I like to use for palliative stress management strategies, because essentially what you're doing is you're driving home, you're parking your car, and you drive the proper direction over this tire puncturing device into your garage. You go home, you do some meditation, you kind of get yourself right after being out in the world that day with all the stresses and strains, and go to bed, eat dinner, all that stuff. Get up in the morning and you drive right back over this, but now you're going the wrong way because you haven't changed the way you're looking at the world. You haven't changed anything. And so even though you've rested your mind, which is healthy, you didn't change anything. Now, I'm going to make a little caveat here that if you have a very religious, and I don't mean religious in the religious sense, I mean religious in the you do it every single day religiously, meditation can actually change your brain. Most people aren't that dedicated, and yoga also falls into this exact same. Everything I'm saying about meditation, you could say about yoga. If you've got a very religious practice, it can change your brain, and it can add some benefits, but even if you do either or both of those two things, if you add the new toolkit to those things, wow, you will be amazed by the difference it makes. It'll take you far beyond the next. Okay. Adaptive stress management strategies. This is learning new skills. Maybe you're having some financial issues. You're not being able to budget. You go take a budgeting class. You increase your job skills so you can make more money. These are helpful, but it's still you that is going to the new job. It's still you that's budgeting. So if you have a spending habit that you use shopping to feel better, then you're still going to have that issue, and that's going to overplay. Now you'll just feel more guilty because you knew better. These are very good to do. I believe in continuous improvement throughout life, not because we're not good enough, but because we can be better. However, these skills aren't going to allow you to achieve your full potential. And by full potential, I don't just mean at work. I mean your full potential of joy, your full potential of being a loving partner to your partner, and to your loving parent to your children, and a loving child to your parents, and all those other things that are so important in life. Okay, advanced stress management strategies. This is using your mind to change your perception. And so this image shows the person who's using these advanced stress management strategies. All these other people hit a wall and there's no way up. And the person who's using advanced stress management strategies takes that ladder and puts it on the other side. Now, the one thing that's different, because people who feel better do better, is it's very likely that if this person who gets up there because they've used these types of skills, they're going to be feeling pretty good. They're going to want to help these people. They might lean over and say, hey, there's a ladder over there, or they might try to move that ladder. They don't tend to leave people in the dust because it feels worse to do that, and they feel good. They don't want to feel worse. Okay, so that's advanced stress management strategies, and I'm going to talk about that in the exciting portion of this presentation. Transformational stress management strategies. You can't get here if you don't do the advanced stress management strategies, because transformational stress management strategies are basically what happens automatically once you apply those advanced strategies repeatedly. Then your subconscious mind starts saying, oh, well, I don't have to go through all this angst and then change my perspective. I can just see a situation and arrive at that more positive, optimistic perspective out of the box. And I don't have to experience any suffering. I can bypass that whole step. My implicit emotion regulation is going to land me in a positive view of the situation. Even if it's a lousy situation, I'll be thinking I can get out of this. Even if I have to start all over again, I will find a way. And I can do it. And that type of thing. When you're there, life feels really good, even when you're dealing with things that aren't the way you want them to be. You can have, one of your parents laying in the hospital bed and probably never going to leave it, and actually get yourself to find a perspective where you're okay. And that, when you can do that, and you can be that calming, loving influence instead of that worried, frightened child at their bedside, you're of more benefit to them, and you're of more benefit to the rest of your family. You're able to make more rational decisions. Everything it's just better, even in the worst of times. Okay, so explicit and implicit emotion regulation. This ties back to all those slides I just went through really quickly. People do not and will not pursue conscious regulatory goals, referring to emotion regulation, unless they have the motivation and the ability to do so. Well, what do they need? Number one, they need the skills, which we're going to talk about some skills that you can use. But they also have to have the motivation. Well, that comes from actually applying the skills and seeing that they work, and then you're motivated. Then you want to tell everybody and your brother don't, because if they're not asking, just get your own life in order and they'll be saying, what are you doing? Everything's going well for you. You seem happier all the time. You're not grumpy. You're not irritable. You're not sad. You're not depressed. You're not frustrated. You're not angry all the time. What are you doing different? And that's when they're ready to hear it. If you do it before then, you won't understand it enough, number one, to explain it well enough so that they really hear you and apply it. You could send them to this video. That's one way you could do it. But trust me, I and hundreds of thousands of other people have tried to get other people going on this when they weren't asking for the information, and they just resist, because it contradicts a lot of things society has taught us that they've got wrong, that science has now shown that it's wrong. But if you don't understand the science, and just trust me, just take care of you, be the best you can, and people will start asking what's changed. And they'll be ready for it then. So when we looked at those dysfunctional skills, are people that do drugs or drink alcohol, is it because they're bad, or is it because they don't have better skills? I'm going to tell you right now, it's because they don't have better skills. When we teach children these skills, they are far less likely to do risky behaviors, to misuse alcohol, or even to drink at all, and far less likely to do drugs. They're also far more likely to graduate and to go on to college. So just giving children these skills changes, and I'm talking not just, the average Joe's kid, I'm talking at-risk children. when you give them these skills, they do better throughout their life. So the first thing is that people will use whatever the best skills they know are. If somebody's being raised in a slummy area, they're only going to know about alcohol and drugs unless somebody intervenes. Your employees come from all over the place. The people in this room come from all over the place. The amount of skills that they have is going to vary widely, and their outcomes that they've achieved in life are going to vary largely based upon those skills. So learning the best skills that you possibly can, and actually not intellectually, but applying them so that you understand viscerally how they change your emotions and how they change how you think, is a really important point. This research is talking about how important emotion regulation is to health, and the unconscious process, which is the transformational stress management, depend on the interplay with the conscious emotion regulation. So that's exactly what I'm saying. When you learn and apply the advanced skills, it will change your unconscious emotion regulation, and that has a huge impact on your health, your relationships that you care about. Okay, let's go back to this. Your mind creates reality in line with your beliefs. You're mostly, I'm pretty sure, familiar with the placebo effect. And the placebo effect is a positive benefit because you believe it's going to happen. The nocebo effect is a negative benefit, or a negative effect. It's not a benefit. When you believe that a detriment will occur. Your beliefs actually influence the outcome you achieve. I didn't put in citations for the placebo effect. You could look at the bottom of the wiki page and probably find a lot of research that demonstrates the placebo effect. It's been well known for decades and decades. Researchers have tried to control for it since I think the 1940s, so it's well established. The nocebo effect, last time I counted, there was 156 research articles documenting the effects of the placebo effect, and I put some of those references at the very end of the presentation, but I just want to talk about these two as indicators that our mind and our thoughts influence our outcomes. And part of that is because when you think a thought, let's say you expect a negative outcome, well, that increases your stress, which changes your chemistry in your body, and digestive function, cognitive function, everything changes when you feel stressed, and that is one of the pathways that makes that happen, that makes the worst outcome. Our emotions, our emotional state, determine how we perceive the world. If we are in a negative mood, we are going to tune in and focus on negative stimuli more. And if we're in a happy mood, we're going to focus on positive stimuli. This is an eye tracking study that actually tracked what the eyes looked at based on people who were burned out and depressed. Now, I added stress because there's other research that talks about stress and how it changes the way we perceive things and how we think. And stress narrows our cognitive abilities, and that narrowing can prevent us from seeing solutions that would be obvious if we were less stressed. And that's when you use the advanced stress management coping skills, you actually reduce stress, which opens that up. So we've all heard, I think everybody's heard that Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, either way you're right. And the reason is because if you think you can't, then the thoughts and the words and the actions you take are different than the thoughts, words, and actions you would take if you believe you can. Okay, be ready to write. This is just a little interactive thing. It's going to just take a minute. And on the next slide, I want you to quickly write down the three things you see. There's going to be A, B, and C. So write down what you see really quickly, and I'll give you just a moment. Write down what A, B, and C are. And I think you're done. Okay, so our perceptions are mood congruent. What does that mean? Well, that means that if you were in a really good mood, A was a squirrel. But if you weren't in a great mood or you were kind of frustrated, maybe it was an alligator. And B was a rope if you were in a good mood. If you weren't or you're kind of fearful, it's a snake. And C could be an axe if you're not in a great headspace, or a pot, like a saucepan, if you're in a good headspace. And online, you're not going to be able to see what others thought about this. You can look at the research, the citation is there. I've done this in multiple conferences with rooms full of people, and once I start saying it's this or that, you hear, oh, I thought it was, and I thought it was. So in a room full of people, you're going to have, it's going to depend on where they are emotionally, but you're going to have some of them are going to see the squirrel and some are going to see the alligator and so on and so forth. And that's because we perceive things differently based on our emotional state. And in the research study, they primed people to certain emotional states and then asked them what they saw. And so they've actually, in the research, it ties it to their. Okay, so this is showing that we perceive a filtered reality. And if you're in that mad mood, you're going to see through the eyes of mad, of angry. You're going to look for and perceive things in a negative light. If you're in a state of love, you're going to perceive things through eyes of love. And there's all sorts of nuances. You could probably sit down and write 100 different emotional states and how you perceive things differently in each of those emotional states. We don't need to do that. We just need to understand that your emotions are a filter. And when you can't directly affect your emotions, but you can change your thoughts, which changes your emotions. And then your perceptions change. Okay, so when Gandhi said, be the change you wish to see in the world, Gandhi was saying, see through the eyes of love. Don't see through the eyes of hate and anger and those types of things. So that, when you hear that, that's what it's referring to. Okay, healthy habits of thought. And this is a slide I'm just going to mention briefly that these habits of thought in the research lead to better outcomes in physical health, mental health, behavioral health, relationships, and success. That's why they're considered healthy habits of thought. Healthy habits of thought is my terminology for them. A lot of people would say positive thinking. I like healthy habits of thought because it ties it to the research. And here's some of the outcomes. I'm not going to belabor this point. I want to get to the stuff that you can take home and use or take back to work and use. Unhealthy habits of thought. Again, with this list, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You can Google each of these things. I've got books that you can read. None of these things, if you do these things, are set in stone. These things are things that you can change by developing healthy habits. I want to talk just a moment about mental illness. 43.8 million Americans suffer from mental illness, which is the equivalent of every man, woman, and child in California and Oregon combined. I'm not saying they're all over there in those two states. I'm simply saying that it's the entire population of those two states. Unhealthy habits of thought create stress, and they are a precursor to mental illnesses, and they stabilize mental illness. If you shift the habits of thought to healthier habits of thought, you can reverse mental illnesses in many cases, and you can prevent mental illnesses by developing them in the I apologize that there's some ambient noise coming in from outside that I have no control over. So our power is in our thoughts. Our thoughts determine our emotional state, but then our emotional state influences our thoughts. But we can come in as a conscious being and interrupt that automatic process and shift our thoughts on because we want to feel better. Most of our thinking is programmed. We think about 60,000 thoughts a day. Most of those are automatic, which is a good thing. However, if you have unhealthy habits of thought, it doesn't serve you very well. It's not personality. For a long time, they thought personalities were stable across the lifespan. The more recent research is showing that that is not the case. And it's also showing that people who consciously and deliberately work to change their habits of thought can significantly change personality traits that do not serve them well in a fairly brief period of time. And I'm not saying overnight, but within months to about 2 years, serious issues can be completely turned around and be automatic by that point in the better place. So our habits of thought feed our mood, and our mood feeds our habits of thought. And those unhealthy habits of thought can trap your brain in unhealthy patterns. But you are a conscious human. You have the ability to get out of that trap. So this is the first method I want to show you. It's very quick. You can do it anywhere. Children can understand it. And that is, if you're feeling bad, you're looking at a problem. You're probably being kind of specific. You might not be specific. It might be a big global problem. But if you feel bad, you're looking at the problem. You are not looking at the solution. So if you start paying attention to your thoughts and your words when you're thinking and speaking about that problem, if you'll say, oh, that felt horrible, that's a focus on the problem. I don't like this. What would I like instead? What is the solution? And even just defining what you would prefer and then saying, okay, I need to figure out how to get there. If you have confidence that you can move in that direction, you're going to feel way better than when you're just staring at the problem saying, I don't like this. So you can just say it's a problem and a solution. You can also say the solution is what you want and the problem is what you don't want. So we're going to do an example of this at the end if we have time. Okay, this research has not received the attention that I believe it should. This completely changed my life in 2007 when this research came out. This redefined the purpose of emotions. And there's subsequent research that supports this, and it's a growing body of work. And maybe someday we'll have public service announcements that educate people about this because it's life-changing. But I'm going to go ahead and do that for you. Okay, the purpose of emotions has been scientifically redefined. Emotions are sensory feedback, just like sight and sound are sensory feedback. The purpose of our emotions is to guide us toward self-actualization, and the guidance is unique to each of us. There's people in this room who probably never ever want to be in front of people speaking, so they would not be guided to do work that would get them up in front of this room. Whereas I joined Toastmasters when I was 18. So it depends on, it's a unique guidance to you. It's based on our personal goals, both spoken and unspoken. There's some of the research that the original and supporting research that is cited underneath here. Let's just dive into this. One of the things I want to say is that you have to have a long-term perspective. So if you want to feel better and you're not feeling good, a piece of chocolate cake, or maybe for some people a drink or a drug or going shopping or something that is not necessarily healthy for them, is going to be their choice on the short term. If you think about it in the long term. Oh, okay, I don't want to become an alcoholic. I don't want the piece of cake because I'm on a diet or whatever. Then you're thinking longer term. And then what would feel better longer term? Well, okay, taking a walk feels better. So then you can take a walk and finding a way to think about the thing differently. Saying, okay, I'm looking at a problem, I think about the solution. Because solutions can be a lot of fun and eager and exciting even before you actually get the thing solved. It's the journey that is. Okay, so self-actualization is movement toward ever-expanding self-determined goals. And they expand because the more we become, the more of our potential we achieve, the more potential we have to become more. Okay, so this is how you handle your thoughts and your emotions. I said earlier you cannot directly change your emotions. Your thoughts change your emotions. So we're going to use this cute car as an analogy. The steering wheel is your thoughts. Your emotions are the wheels and the direction you're going and how fast you're going and all of that. So if you're driving along, you want to change your thoughts, and changing your thoughts will change your emotions. You don't want to crawl across the hood and try to shift that tire, your emotions, in the direction you want. You want to do it using the steering wheel because this is a rough ride. When you use the steering wheel to change your thoughts, which change your emotions in a positive direction, you're as nimble as this guy and you're happy. And that is the essence of having psychological flexibility. And your emotions guide you which thoughts are going to serve you well and which ones won't. And basically, the best feeling thoughts are the best. And these are some of the reasons, and that's a slide that you could go back to. Okay, this is the resilience linked to mental health. Secure attachment, experiencing positive emotions, and having a purpose in life are three important psychological building blocks of resilience. And I wanted to put that here to emphasize that the research is again and again, especially since positive psychology was born in the 90s, showing that people who thrive feel more positive emotions. And it's not because their situations are better, it's because of the way they perceive their situations. So pay attention to your emotions and understand their meaning. This is a chart that you can use to help you know what you're doing. If you think a thought and you decide that you want to think about that thought because it doesn't feel good and you want to know what what other thought you should think. If you think a new thought, it's related and it feels better, you're in the right direction. If it feels worse or heavier, that doesn't feel as good, you're going in the wrong direction. Now, because we have habits of thought, we can think thoughts. We can think hundreds of thoughts that are all very similar. And if they feel very similar emotionally, there's no movement. Now, if you're in a state of joy, there's nothing wrong with not having any movement. That's a good place to stay. But if you're angry or frustrated or depressed or sad or guilt-ridden, that's not a good place. You want to start looking for thoughts that feel better. And this isn't something you do overnight. You're changing a habit. So you're working on it a little bit at a time every day. While you're driving is a good time. Any downtime where you're not actually thinking about something or have to think about something. So if you're typing on your keyboard, not necessarily the best time. On a bio break, great time to think about, check in. How am I feeling? Okay, what am I thinking about if I don't feel good? Or even if you're feeling really good, create a touchstone. What makes me feel this way? And then return to thinking about that more often. Say, make that something that when you need a little boost, you go there and you think about that thing that makes you feel so good. We consciously process about 50 bits of data in any given minute or any given moment, and that data is filtered. And then unconsciously, we process about 10 million bits of data, and it's raw, it's big data, it's unfiltered. Our emotions give us feedback from that unconscious data as well as the conscious. It's giving us the global thing, and it doesn't have the cognitive biases that our conscious thoughts so often. We have major filters, and the ones that we can change are our focus. That's the easiest to change. And then beliefs and expectations we can also change. It takes time because beliefs are habits of thought, but you can. Our thoughts drive our words, emotions, and behavior, which means that our mood has a really strong impact on the words and behavior that we express. We can't control our emotions directly. We can control our thoughts. So this is another process that you can use. And basically you think a thought and you say, okay, is there a more satisfying thought that I could think about that? And you want to lean in the direction of more satisfying. And you can just say, is this thought more satisfying or less satisfying? Okay, what would be more satisfying? And just keep working in the more satisfying realm. This diagram talks about your immediate, your implicit evaluation of any given situation. Something happens, a change happens at work, change happens in your personal life, change happens in the world. And if you see that change as an unsolvable problem, your stress is at the top of the chart at a 10. If you see it as something that's potentially solvable, your stress drops. You don't even have to change it. You just have to think, there is a solution. Somebody has a solution to this. I may not know it, but somebody in the world can solve this. And if it's your job, maybe you can find that person who has the solution. If it's not your job, you can just have some faith that the person who has the solution will step forward and solve the problem. If you think there's several solutions, your stress drops even more. If the solutions are all over the place and they're easy to find, your stress level is pretty low. If you know that the solution you have is going to solve the problem and do it in a timely way, then you are going to be able to get your stress down to a 2. And then this is where the transformational stress management, I apologize, my email was notifying me of some new things. If you've applied the advanced stress management strategies for a while and you're now in the transformational stage, you may, when that problem arises and everybody around you is looking and seeing it as a problem, you may see it as an opportunity. And that's a really good thing. Now, they can't hear you, but you can start taking action on that opportunity. The final thing I want to say about this diagram is that if you are seeing a problem as an opportunity, somebody who's seeing it as an unsolvable problem can't hear you. So if you want to inspire them, you have to figure out where they are on this chart and then go to one level better than where they are. So if they're seeing it as an unsolvable problem, you want to speak to them from the potentially solvable problem position and inspire them to come to you. If you talk to them from it's an opportunity, they're going to think you're nuts. You will not sound logical to them. You have to go to closer to where they are and draw them closer. And as they move, you can keep bringing them to where you are. That's what charismatic people do. They bring people to a lower stress level by their interactions. And that inherently, automatically makes the people feel better, and they want to be around them because being around them makes them feel better. And so this can be used. I could do an hour session on this if you had the basis of understanding that emotions are feedback that are designed to guide us. Um, Mental health promotion, this particular study has some of the greatest names in positive psychology. Chris Peterson, Ed Diener, Marty Seligman are definitely like really the the main players. Chris is gone now, but they're really big players in positive psychology research, very respected. Um, and they're talking about how these new approaches that maximize human potential build psychological resilience and promote mental health. You really can't separate resilience and mental health because resilience improves mental health. People who um, suffer and experience PTSD generally are less resilient. Somebody who's resilient could experience the same type of situation and experience something that's called post-traumatic growth, which means that they actually end up becoming more as a result of experiencing the experience. The difference is their habits of thought. If you have unhealthy habits of thought, you're far more likely to experience PTSD following a trauma. And if you have healthy habits of thought, you're far more likely to experience post-traumatic growth. All right, that does it for today. At the actual presentation, we would go back to the solution problem slide and play that out with a member of the audience. We would take one of their problems and have them talk about it and then identify whether they're focused on the problem or on the solution and do it until they get to the point where they can actually um, identify it themselves and they can feel how it feels different when they focus on the problem than when they focus on the solution. And everybody would see, you can see it on somebody's face when you start focusing on the solution. Their face changes, the stress eases, and they are more able to deal with it. You can find me on LinkedIn, Quora, and Twitter. And you can find me on my websites, happinessfirst.com and joywalk.org, which is where you'll find the white papers I mentioned during the presentation. You can find my books on Amazon. You can order them from Barnes & Noble. So there's lots of other resources. This particular presentation is about resilience, and I did write a book, Harness the Power of Resilience, Be Ready for Life. I actually, although that's a good book, I'm not saying it's not, I wrote a book after that that I think is better. It's sort of a book workbook. It doesn't have a lot of blank pages. You need a notepad. I don't see a point in publishing blank pages so that you can use it as a workbook. But it has exercises and it's more spelled out. And I think for somebody who actually wants to apply this information, it would be the better resource. And that is called Mental Wellness Made Easy. Either one of them has the information to get you there. Do not buy more than one of my books until you've read one of my books because I do self-plagiarize. The only reason I would say to buy more than one of my books would be if you had a very specific interest in the topic of the book. Because, for example, my suicide prevention book has a lot of information about the research on suicide and suicide prevention. My children's book has a lot of research about social and emotional learning skills and the outcomes children experience. So if you're trying to get a school board, for example, to adopt social and emotional learning as part of the curriculum to improve the outcomes children experience, that book would be a great resource. If you simply want to learn the skills and then maybe teach the children in your care those skills, Mental Wellness Made Easy would be the better resource. So that's pretty much, and you can contact me and ask me which book or books I think would suit you best. Because what I teach is at the root cause of human thriving, it applies to every aspect of your life. There's books in the work on diversity appreciation. There's a book in the on relationships, on parenting, because the learning advanced stress management skills will help you in anything you do. It doesn't matter if it's in school, at work, on the playing field, um, anywhere and everywhere that you do things that are important to you, it will help you. And so I write the books to target those specific areas. And if you're anywhere along the I-40 corridor across the country, take a look at joywalk.org. I am crossing the country in 2020 on foot, and I plan to give a speech every day. And as long as the organizer is not charging people for admittance, I will be doing that for free. There will be t-shirts and all sorts of ways that you can support this effort, but I'm going to be sharing this information with people because it's not getting out there, and it is so important. It literally saves lives, reduces suffering, improves anything and everything that it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. You want people to have a better quality of life. You want people to be more successful. You want people to be healthier mentally, physically, and behaviorally. Um, and all of those things can be achieved when we go back to the root cause. And the truth of the matter is that when people are stressed, they do bad things. When people aren't stressed, they are actually kinder to one another. They display better behaviors, better, more kindness, better corporate citizenship, everything we want. And all it takes is teaching people how to use their minds the way I believe that they were designed to be used, and science is more and more supporting that. So if you would like me to speak in your area in 2020, I'm heading out right around the first of the year, and I will walk 12 miles a day until I get to Charleston, South Carolina. So I'm starting at the beginning, actually the end of Route 66 on Santa Monica Pier, and walking to Charleston, and I'm going through Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, a little bit up there in the panhandle of Texas, Oklahoma, and then heading across over to Bledsoe, Tennessee, and then over near Asheville, and then down to Charleston. So I'm going to be largely around that I-40 corridor, and I am willing to travel about 100 miles. I'm walking 12 miles a day, largely because I want to have time to give the speeches. That's the whole point. And so if I need to travel to where you are from my route, I'm going to rely on the kindness of strangers to get me from the end of my walk at the end of the day back to where I'm staying that night. And I will have transportation, so I am willing. I'm thinking that about 100 miles round, one way to speak in an area. If there's, I won't drive 100 miles to speak to two people, but if there's a group of people and there's not something closer, then I will drive myself to go do that. And so if you're within 100 or so miles of the I-40 corridor, and I won't be all walking on I-40, I don't think I'd get very far doing that. I think my route is on secondary roads, and and the details of the day-to-day route will be on the website as we get closer, and what days I expect to be where. And then I am going to make some side trips as well. I'm going to make a side trip, hopefully before I start, depends, I'm still working on the plans, but up in the Seattle area, and then go down to San Diego before I begin, San Francisco, Sacramento area before I begin, and then during the trip going up to Santa Fe and down to the Houston area are two side trips, possibly a side trip to Atlanta. So I'll have those types of things. I will not be walking on Sundays. I'll give my feet a rest. However, I am willing to speak in religious organizations. I don't care what religion it is, just religious organizations on Sundays, or if whatever religion it is meets on another day of the week and they would like me to come speak, I'm more than happy to do so as part of the walking days type of thing. And that's enough about the Joy Walk, and I hope to see you. Have a wonderful day.